I'm a contrarian. Let me tell you that. For those of you who are very young, who are just beginning, must be wondering what is a contrarian. I'm also going to put up something here which, no discipline exists in isolation ever. So you borrow and constantly exchange ideas. And that's what theories are all about. So remember that what we have been talking about so far is not necessarily theories, they are approaches. They are approaches from time to time that anthropology, in the process of finding an identity for itself as an individual independent discipline, tried to carve out a distinct identity by doing things differently or by incorporating ideas that were different. Now, why do I say I'm a contrarian? Let me begin with the band-aid that she had given to me for today to talk about evolutionism and diffusionism. And I think in the first 40 minutes of his presentation, Professor Gregory was essentially talking about evolutionism and diffusionism. But take the idea called evolution. What is evolution? Anybody? Do you think there is something called a process of evolution taking place in societies all the time? Do you agree that there is something called biological evolution happening? Know how to use theories in your day-to-day research or work. And I think I am actually going to try and make an attempt to answer that. But let me sort out this whole confusion over here. The reason why anthropology is so interesting and adventurous, and I've always said I am actually in love with the discipline for the simple reason that there is so much to explore. And when there is so much to explore, what is it that you are exploring? You're exploring ideas. So both evolution and diffusion were primarily ideas. It's only when you add isms to it that you actually convert it into some kind of an ideological stance. And when you convert it into an ideological stance, that's where the problematic begins. Then you say, okay, the societies have evolved, as was the case with our earlier anthropologists who actually came up that the societies evolved from simple to complex. Okay, very simple idea. Societies evolve from simple to complex. So when they're saying societies evolved from simple to complex, what was it that they were trying to say? Some societies are simple and the others has evolved or more complex. What did you do? You designated the terms primitive to those simple societies. And you said, okay, these are primitive. And how do you define this primitive? In terms of savagery, barbarism, and civilization. Are you going to use these words today? No. So if no, then what is it? On the one hand, we're saying the idea of evolution persists, but the societies have not really passed through the stages of savagery, barbarism to civilization. Because the moment we said that they passed through these three stages and became from simple to complex, we assumed a colonial position of saying we are evolved and they are not evolved. So what we are saying here is that evolution is a process that's constantly and continuously going on. But the fact that anthropology is a synthesis of both biological and social sciences. And in biological anthropology, the premise is of evolutionary biology. So if evolutionary biology is so integral to the discipline of anthropology per se, when you take the holistic perspective of the discipline, then you say that, okay, if there are biological evolution, then there has to be social evolution. Now that's the contestation here. कि biological evolution तो हो रहा है. There is no denying that fact that there is biological evolution. in the process of establishing ourselves as a science, we also borrowed those ideas from biological, from those biological schools. Take, for example, something that you've all talked about, the notion of survival of the fittest. Who gave the concept survival of the fittest? By Herbert Spencer. Much before Darwin talked about it. And Herbert Spencer wrote volumes on sociology. और वो इतना जबरदस्त narcissist था that he never used to read anybody else. So when Darwin read him, and he found his having used this term, survival of the fittest, and Darwin acknowledges, it's unfortunately after Darwin that nobody seems to acknowledge that the idea of survival of the fittest came from Herbert Spencer and not from Darwin. Because the biological, but what was terrible, and here I'm trying to also answer in between Dr. Nayak. You know what Spencer said when he talked about survival of the fittest, since he was talking about society? He said, those who are not fit, those who are mentally challenged, those who are physically challenged have no right to live. Now, imagine all of us sitting here. Do you think that's something, those of us who worked on the question of disability, we want to talk about this, that people who are not physically fit or intellectually challenged do not have the right to live? What Darwin did was that Darwin modified the idea and said, well, the species keep on modifying itself. So why this entire school of evolutionism came under this kind of criticism was this, that you were borrowing an idea and then you were wanting to fit it into social spaces or into human beings, to apply that idea to human beings. So therefore, this was certainly a critique of the school of evolution. It's perfectly fine, और मेरी एक बहुत बड़ी grudge जो पिछले 50 बरस में रही है that I have taught more or less. We don't teach the discipline. We don't teach theories. We teach history. We teach history of theories, and we teach history of, we don't even really teach history of ideas because we don't discuss ideas. Take another, what the evolutionists said, beginning with Tyler, Morgan. You can all go back to these hundreds of texts on the internet that talk about all these theories. How the evolutionists looked at evolution of marriage as an institution. And what did they say? They said it started from promiscuity to, what is it? Promiscuity to polyandry to polygyny to monogamy. So आज civilized जो थे वो monogamous हैं, and those who are not civilized are going to be everything else. Do you see that all these forms of marriage, or the word promiscuous, quote unquote, is a terrible word to use. And somebody was talking about river being, WHR, rivers being a very, very, one of those most brilliant theoreticians of anthropology. Do you know, Rivers was not really an anthropologist, he was a psychiatrist. And most of his work was on psychiatry. And those of you who are interested in reading about what W.H.R. Rivers did and did to todas, please go to the UIF website and read that write-up and conversation on W.H.R. Rivers to know people like Professor P.K. Mishra, who worked in todas, as to how misleading Rivers' study of todas is. So here, what I'm trying to do for you, I'm trying to break certain myths. I'm first and foremost trying to tell you as students of any discipline, I don't care, if it's anthropology, for heaven's sake, even in your remotest dreams, don't ever say that any community is primitive. Just write it off your dictionaries, because the moment you do that, you bring in an element of bias into your writing, into your learning, because you say that those who belong to that so-called category of primitive really did not have any knowledge systems. I just don't know how to undo that part of anthropology, where we have taught definitions of tribe as illiterate, because how this whole school of evolutionary theory, or evolutionism as it is called, started is from there. But when I take you back to the notion of evolution, now what is inherent in the notion of evolution? In the notion of evolution is inherent is the notion of diversity. That human society, when you see the question of biological diversity, you all know from protozoa to how there have been multiplicity of cellular multiplications, and how from several species we've come to recognize various other species. I just take you back to, I hope I'll be able to run my system through, one or two interpretations that have been said here of this whole concept of evolutionism. I just want to read that out to you, what I have taken. I normally don't like to interfere with my speech with any form of writing or reading notes, but this is what I thought was very important for you people. The diversity, the biological diversity, there are more than 2 million existing species of the organisms which have been recognized. And many more remain to be discovered. They're saying almost from 10 million to 30 million. Now, this is infinite variation. When we opted or adopted evolutionism as a notion, what was it that we said? Just now, Professor Gregory said, unilinear theory of evolution. That you simply evolve from simple to complex. The biological evolutionary theory is not saying that. It's not saying that you evolve only from simple to complex. You say there is multiplicity and every species has a form of adaptability. So therefore, when you have all these societies spread across the globe, they all have some or the other form of specialized traits, and that is what they excel in. So when you go back to your notes, which of course at length have been given by Professor Gregory, or you see it from whatever is available on the internet, IGNU lessons, Gyan Kosh. I didn't give you any reading because there's so much available, and they are all talking about the same thing. They all take me back to 1968 when I did my graduation and learned for the first time the theories. Anthropology has advanced. Anthropology has gone miles and miles and miles away from what Tyler and Morgan had said. You take this entire notion of evolution from unilinear, a progression. Now, this whole business of progression, and last night I was simply trying to compare it. I said we could take this because it was talking about growth from simple to complex, position by which you can map all the societies across the world. The notion of universal human rights is quite akin to what is being said in terms of earlier theories, that that's how the societies have evolved. Because what was it that they were trying to tell us? That there are some societies which are not on the Human Development Index where the others are. But how do you measure Human Development Index? You measure it by the Western standards because they prescribed it, they preached it. It was not that there was any kind of a consensus taken on this. So you remain in certain ways, frozen in time and space, and then you try and redraft it and recraft it in certain other ways to say that things are modified. When you move from evolutionism to diffusionism, what did happen? You said, okay, the societies are not having this kind of a unilinear. Two things for which this entire school of evolutionary theory came under a lot of criticism was one, the psychic unity of mankind. Now, what did psychic unity of mankind say? सब लोग एक जैसा सोचते हैं, सब लोग एक तरह से काम करेंगे, सब लोग एक तरह से बढ़ेंगे. You take that, equate it with the notion of development. What is the assumption over there? The societies are, what were the classes that were made? Developed, underdeveloped, developing. What is it that you're trying to do? That those who are developed have given a set of norms and principles, and every other society will have to follow that. I'm sorry, I'm deviating miles and miles away from what you are expected to be learning as beginners in the discipline. But this is where my angst is, that you are not really a beginner in learning. When you learn, you critique. And if you don't critique, then you don't learn. Because then you memorize, and then you memorize and you rewrite the whole thing again and again without really trying to understand what the idea was all about. So remember that all theoretical approaches are about ideas. How do we apply theory in research? That's where the problematic had been, that you are not really able in a position, you don't know how to translate it into your material. Let me give you one simple example. There's a theory of liminality. What does the word liminality mean? That you are in a state of transit. You are in a, you're going from one phase to other. Now, let me tell you how we use that theory of liminality in our study of people who had accidents and had to be amputated. Unfortunately, 2 days ago, a young girl in Chandigarh, a tree fell in a school compound. One girl lost her life and the other's arm had to be amputated. Now, this child is going to be, quote unquote, disabled for the rest of her life. Now, when she's going through, they may try to replant the arm and all, she's going through a process of trying to readjust her life entirely. So she goes into a phase, liminality, essentially the entire Victor Turner's concept was that you go in a phase where you want to forget in the process of magic or the events that are happening. So this is precisely what is going to happen to her. She will go into a stage where she wants to forget everything, doesn't want to remember that she's lost her arm. By God's grace, if they do manage to replant the arm or give her an artificial limb or whatever, then she will have the next phase where she will have to adjust it. This is precisely what he was trying to tell you in his theory of liminality. So that's how you use those theories into your research. So whenever you're reading any theory, please remember and ask yourself how I can use it for the kind of work that I am trying to do at the moment. When I say you move from, two texts that I have on my desktop open at the moment simultaneously. One is this Gyan Kosh lecture on theories of evolutionism and diffusionism. Typical dated classic style of writing. Everybody's name is there, the works are given, the dates of birth and etc. and what were the ideas they gave. And then you open Encyclopedia of Social Sciences. And you pick up the concept diffusion. But they're not talking about diffusionism. They're talking about diffusion. And what is diffusion? Diffusion is something which is a process of how things move from one to other or way back. It's not one-way process. It's always a two-way process. So the wrong assumption that the diffusionist made, for example, when you go to the British school of diffusionism, the British school of diffusionism started with the assumption that all cultures evolved from Egypt. That's what Perry and others were talking about in their work. Why did they evolve from Nile? Because the evolutionists started dividing the society into phases, starting with Adam Smith, who is considered to be the father of economics and not really anthropology. That you had these stages where you start with hunting gathering, then you move on to agriculture, and then you move on to commerce. These were the phases, so this is how he was looking at various societies. Now, in classic evolutionary theory, we started with food gathering, hunting and pastoral activities to combine with that, hunting and fishing, sometimes we say that, or foraging societies is the word that we use over there. And then you move on to some kind of, hoe cultivation, and then finally to settled agriculture. अब हम settled agriculture में freeze तो नहीं हुए. We moved on beyond that. Now, when we start measuring people on the scale, कि hunting gathering में कौन रह गया, और शिफ्टिंग कल्टीवेशन में कौन आ गया, और एग्रीकल्चर में कौन मूव कर गया, और उसके बाद जो एडम स्मिथ कह रहा था कॉमर्स, which in other words meant industrialism, because Adam Smith also didn't imagine that there was something going to be globalization and cyberspaces, and the world is going to open like this. Your imagination is restricted to what appears before you. So please remember here that these phases or these, these transitions that we created with the assumption कि एक stage खत्म होगी और दूसरी शुरू हो जाएगी. The world doesn't move like that. Societies don't move like that. They move in some kind of parallels. So all kinds of phases are going to stay there. Even today, when you have moved into cyberspaces, where almost I understand that 73% of India's population carries a mobile phone today. Yet many of them would continue to practice fishing. Many of them would continue to do hoe cultivation or shifting the cultivation. But then, you see, how do you relate your economic activities? The most important premise that you must understand for this theory building is this, that what is it that changes? It changes with technology. तो शुरू में कहा कि आप फूड गैदरिंग से जब हंटिंग और फिशिंग में आए तो you develop some kind of material culture with it, because you had to develop some kind of implements to be able to do these activities, and that was your growth. That was the progression. So those who were not able to invent those implements actually stayed back or stagnated, and those who were able to implement, invent or borrow or take it from somewhere, and that's where diffusion comes in, they moved ahead. Well, that's not really true. If you remember words that Nehru said for Adivasi communities, allow them to grow according to their genius. So the word social change itself, honestly, in past 30 odd years of my writing, I've never really used the word social change because I don't think so change takes place. It's just transitions. There's small transitions that take place, small transformations that take place. Within the same class, people move on to do different things. Somebody can become something, the other person may just decide to stay where they are. So you can't say कि एक तो backward हो गया और एक forward हो गया. ये जो dichotomy है, you have to be very, very careful about using this kind of a thing. But understand, I'm again repeating myself. Remember, ideas don't die. So when you open encyclopedia and you try, you won't find the word diffusionism to begin with. You find diffusion. Now, diffusion is something which is a process, which is something changing over here. So the earlier diffusionists, when they started with this idea, they said, the evolutionists were static. They were assuming that sari societies across the world will move in a similar manner or in a similar progressive manner. Whereas the diffusionists said, no, the movement is not in one direction, but the whole growth of, by now we were talking about growth of culture in society. Prior to that, we were only talking about technology, that what are the technological changes that take place. Honestly speaking, even when you will read modernization or you will read all development theories, everybody will be talking about technology. So it's the idea itself hasn't died. The idea that how you change in technical sense. But what diffusionists said, that ideas don't evolve at one place. The evolutionists were making this contention that ideas evolve and then they move, and then that's how every society must evolve together. One of the criticism was that, okay, ideas also evolve, as Franz Boas later said, and when Simpriti was trying to ask that question, that has been the fundamental difference between the American School of Anthropology and the British School of Anthropology. The American School of Anthropology, starting with Franz Boas, had started critiquing. Franz Boas gave a lecture on radio in America, where he critiqued the question of race itself. That how do you have apartheid in that country? And imagine it was 1932, where he was challenging that notion that you can't, have this whole business of one race is superior or inferior. But do you think the idea itself has died out? You've seen recently what has happened after the Ukraine war. The refugees who came from Syria and Afghanistan have been asked to vacate their places wherever they were being housed, so that these white people can be brought in. In the United States, you see the country which supposedly has now become the harbinger of all kinds of new ideas and the flag bearer of it. Just see what happened very recently, the kind of black killings that have been happening there, the abortion rights which have been taken away from women. Now, when you, as young anthropologists, what is it that you're going to research? You're not going to go back to a community today to sit for 6 months there, or 3 years, as Malinowski said, but you are going to study the issues that confront your society today. And you have to use these theories to see if any of those theoretical understandings that you picked up here are in any way going to help you understand the issue that you're trying to tackle. So let me give you this example of abortion. Who has the right on a woman doesn't have a right on her body. She can't take a decision for herself, whether she wants to carry the child or not. Who takes the decision for her? The state. Now, what business state has to take a decision for her? Because the religion that state follows or takes it as state religion says this is what has to happen. So who were the first persons who were contesting the whole idea of evolution or this whole school of evolutionary biology? They were the ones who were followers of a particular religion. The idea that they had that the entire genesis was from, one creation, which was Christianity, of course, in their opinion. And therefore, no other kind of religion is going to be permissible. You see, those who were writing, whether it was Tyler, Morgan, or the others, when it came to the context of religion, what did they say? It started with animism, animatism, polytheism to monotheism. और आपको एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग इंटरप्रिटेशन पता है कि अभी भी जब हम जो कुछ इस वक्त इंडिया में हो रहा है उसको डिस्कस करते हैं, so some people are still using that connotation that there is only monotheism, that is the religion of the book, which tells you what is right and what is wrong. Now, as an anthropologist, are you going to accept that position? Are you going to say that all that diversity for which Fraser sold millions of copies of his book called The Golden Bough? The Golden Bough is the most sold book ever. Would you believe it? And what was Golden Bough about? The Golden Bough was about the ritual practices, the magic religion of communities that he was resourcing the data from. That is from where the word armchair anthropology came. This is again something that I'm teaching evolutionism, not really teaching, but talking to you about it, probably almost after 8-9 years since I've stopped teaching regularly. And it just occurred to me yesterday that what is it that we are doing? When I'm trying to tell you or teach you that there was this school. I'm assuming that we have evolved from there. Now, being evolved from there and being the evolutionist are two very contesting perspectives. Now, these very people who gave the school of animism, animatism, polytheism, and monotheism are actually trying to say that the only religions are religions of the book, and all other religions are pagan. They just don't exist. So therefore, there is this evolution that has happened. And since Christianity came, later of all other religions as such per se, then whoever the other religions, which did not have a book or a single deity, are really not religions. So what happens to Adivasi cultures? What happens to their systems? It was so simple for us. नायक साहब का जो किताब बरसों हम पढ़ाते रहे और जो डेफिनेशन हम एक आदिवासी की कोट करते रहे, उसमें वो बिल्कुल इवोल्यूशनरी पर्सपेक्टिव था. हमने कहा वो इलिटरेट है, हमने कहा कि उसके पास कोई विजडम नहीं है, हमने कहा कि वो he roams naked, so much so that very recently we had this entire conversation that a very famous anthropologist in India, Hammondorf, wrote a book titled The Naked Nagas. How did he view it? So you think he may be, we may call him as a functionalist, or we may call him a structural functionalist. But the fact that he was looking at the other society from a colonial perspective, that hasn't changed. And the colonial perspective is the evolutionary perspective. So if the West continues to look at us from that colonial perspective and say, no, you are underdeveloped, you are not, your religion is pagan, your culture is of no value, what happens? I think one of the articles that I did for Sunita's book was that all those ethno-medicines that we talk about today, the majority of them have been usurped from the Adivasi societies without acknowledgement. And then we just clean their parks of those herbs. But now we say, no, they don't accept allopathic system of medicine or the modern system of medicine. So therefore, they are not advanced. So you say they are, quote unquote, they are primitive. So the idea is the interpretation of the idea that I want you people to look at. That, all right, read these approaches to classical anthropology, as I tend to call it. Read it with a view to look at them. What is important and what is not important in them? The idea per se is very, very important. The idea is not dead. Neither the idea of evolutionism, nor the idea of evolution per se, neither the idea of diffusion per se, neither the idea of societies having function to perform, which you will be learning later on. But since my contention was to deal only with these two things today, evolution and diffusion, both these ideas are persisting. It's a question of how we look at those ideas. Now, we are not looking at those ideas from that perspective. If we look at evolution in terms of diversity, then it is justifying the need to see that cultures not only evolve, but they diversify also. So there is a huge amount of cultural diversity today. And we don't have to equate that cultural diversity with any kind of biological diversity per se. All my friends in sociobiology are today desperately trying to do that. They're saying everything is a result of biology. Everything is a cause of your genes. So if you are, you have any kind of challenges or you don't behave in a particular manner, then the society really doesn't have anything to do with it. It is your genes. We all know it's not true. So be very, very careful when you grow and you start writing those very, very dated ideas with the contention, with the citation कि उसने ये कहा था. जो इस वक्त इवोल्यूशनरी स्कूल को क्रिश्चियन थियोलॉजी क्रिटिक कर रही है, वो कह रही है कि ह्यूमनिज्म और लिबरलिज्म, ये सारे के सारे जो हैं, they are equivalent to evolutionism. They're all, they don't have any kind of they have no business of existing, because they are anti religion or they are anti ethical. So there is no ethics according to them in these positions, and therefore when you look at diffusion, the fact of diffusion is migration. So when Franz Boas started mapping them, taking material culture from different parts of the world and started mapping those, what was it that he was looking at? He was looking at the similarity and the differences. The whole school of cultural comparisons is, what is it that it is looking at? It is looking at similarities and differences. But it certainly has no business of classifying one as superior to the other. And that's one thing which I want you to caution about, that when you read these theories, please don't read it with that kind of, a blindness. कि उसने कहा था वो बहुत बड़ा रिसर्चर और स्कॉलर था, वो बहुत बड़ा रिसर्चर, आप भी बहुत बड़े रिसर्चर और स्कॉलर हैं. सवाल ये है कि आपको अपनी वैल्यू रिकॉग्नाइज करके समझनी चाहिए कि जो what I am able to understand about my society. It's not that everybody is going to be an autoethnographer, but it's a question of when you see the whole idea. It's so sad to see. I don't know, when I talk to you about postmodernism, maybe I'll be discussing this if I feel 100% fit enough on that day. This whole dichotomy of emic versus etic. क्या होता है ये? Is it possible? A researcher, जब वो अपनी एक research करता है, how many translations he does in that process? The person who's, one of the critiques that Mishra ji did of River's work among the Todas was this, that he had an interpreter who was a Tamilian. Obviously, he didn't know the Toda language. So he asked the questions and the Toda told him something, and then River translated that into translated into his English, and then you come back and then you write it in your own, in a style that you consider is the research style, keeping it objective. तो उस objectivity में the difference is, जब टायलर लिख रहे थे या जब मॉर्गन लिख रहे थे, तो वो इस बारे में सेंसिटिव भी नहीं थे. आज आप जब लिखेंगे, या this whole business of postmodernist, which is again being critiqued for several reasons, जब आप उसको लिखते हैं तो you are at least sensitive about it. So today, if Toda gets up and reads the book that Toda written by Rivers, he will probably say, no, my great grandparents were never like this. They were very, very different. And you're very fortunate that nobody in your country is, you have 8.6% of these indigenous populations. And nobody's coming back and telling you this, that why do you have to categorize us like this? We are not like this. But it has happened in countries like Australia, Canada, where they have filed lawsuits against ethnographers who've been writing these kind of stories. So read theory with the perspective that you are able to translate it into your research. And any theory, please get over this. I'm very, very disappointed these days when I say, जो sociology की theory है वो anthropology में apply नहीं हो सकती है, जो psychology की theory है वो हमारे यहाँ नहीं apply हो सकती है, हमारी नहीं हो सकती. See, all theories are basically integration of what kind of imagination. Appadurai calls it imagination. It's all about imagination, that how you use your imagination to convert an idea into something that you are reading today. One of them is working on disaster management here. I have a student, the last thesis that I have to supervise is from Ladakh. Now, in the name of ecotourism, the ecotourism is promoted as a very progressive idea. And nobody's really looking at it as to how it is destroying the local culture. In Ladakh, women and men always work together in their agricultural fields. Now men have moved to tourism, and they have moved, many of them have gone for education. Not the girls, the Ladakhi girls are also getting education. They were getting education earlier also. But women are left alone. Those who are not educated or those who opt to stay back to take care of their children. So the entire burden of managing agriculture has fallen upon them. Now, what is it? It is what in sociology you call that an unintended consequence. So what you thought was a very bright idea of ecotourism, which is a very modern, very, there's nothing called modern, unfortunately, very contemporary idea, is proving out to be so disastrous. We did a paper for EPW on Rohtang Tunnel Pass. Now, everybody is thinking Rohtang Tunnel Pass is a very progressive idea because it allows mobility for our forces to move. It has destroyed cultural ecology of the area. So please, when you read it, these theories, and what you are going to construct to yourself in terms of theoretical premise, read it with a critical eye. Read it with a position that if you were subjected to that kind of a situation, what is it that is going to emanate out of it? They wrote it for a period. All classical evolutionism and classical, use the word classical, diffusionism was written towards the end of the 19th century, when anthropology was actually taking or building its foundations. They used societies like ours as their field studies. They didn't go back to study their own societies. Most of them came over, or whether even for that matter, when Redcliffe Brown came and studied Andaman Nicobar Islands, or Morgan went to study Iroquois. And use with little caution the word armchair anthropology. What was the fundamental difference between, we pride ourselves in our tradition of fieldwork. And in this tradition of fieldwork, what was happening, Sampriti is telling me, we are also fond of studying other cultures. हमारे कॉलेज टाइम में संप्रीति हमारी फेवरेट जो किताब हमें रिकमेंड किया जाता था वो जॉन बीटी की अदर कल्चर था. And fortunately what happened कि मेरे कमरे की खिड़की खुली रह गई और बंदर उस किताब को उठा के ले गए. और it was then I started realizing how much I love John Beatty. Other culture is othering. Because when you say we are studying other culture, for years we defined anthropology as the study of other cultures. Who gave us the right to study other cultures without knowing their language, without knowing their cultural attributes? And that's my critique of the universal human rights. I don't know how many of you really know that, but American anthropologists did not agree with these definitions, universal declarations and universal definitions, because they don't necessarily apply to us. There are cultural variations, there are cultural differences, and when there are cultural variations and cultural differences, then you have to take this into consideration. So studying other cultures is not problematic, but doing othering in the name of other cultures is problematic. And it started, this whole business of doing othering started very much from these very theories that we are trying to talk about today. So when you say Egypt was the center of all civilization across the world, Egypt is a very beautiful country and they really do have a very old civilization. So do we. So do China, so do maybe several other parts of the world. The only other place which certainly does not have that old a civilization is the United States of America. But then the assumption was, since you became economically, industrially much better earlier than the others, you started believing that it was your fundamental right to give all these norms and all these theories and all these, progressive ideas to other societies. So studying other cultures is not really the issue. Othering is the problem. And we've continued to do that. We've not stopped doing othering in our researches, because the moment we start writing our research in third person, we are doing othering.